Hey everyone, Dr. Amy Avalar with Acupuncture Practice Systems, and this is another video in our series on the intersection of motherhood and entrepreneurship. And in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about how these young child years are years that are going to be so nonlinear in our growth. And that's perfectly okay. Things to keep in mind are that these are times where you're going to be dealing with pregnancy and postpartum time periods and trying to ramp back up to get back into practice. And then if you have additional children, you go through that same cycle all over again. Pregnancies are difficult some of the time for us. Different pregnancies, you can have one that is smoother and one that is harder, which is what my case was. And then you go through times of postpartum and maybe having childcare, maybe not having childcare. And so all of those things need to be taken into consideration before you give yourself a hard time about your growth not being as successful as what you wanted it to be during this time frame, right? Because you are adding in children, you're adding in entirely new shifts into your relationship. All of a sudden, neither one of you you can't both just leave the house whenever you feel like it, right? All of a sudden there's a baby to be in charge of, and if you make a plan, you have to make sure your spouse or somebody else is going to be there to be with the baby, and vice versa, right? They can't just take off. So there's a whole lot of things, a lot of shifts that are happening during this time frame. So I just kind of want to give you just a little bit of insight into my perspective and my journey. And a lot of women have, when they are having children, if they're having multiples, will have them close-ish together, kind of like what I did. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey just as kind of an outline of how little time you have and how it absolutely makes perfect sense that your business is not growing and your practice is not growing in the same ways as you originally expected it to be, because it's impossible to do that at the same rate for your time specifically, right? Now, your rest of your business can be growing. That was the case with me. I still continued to make more gross and more net each of those years during over the last 5-6 years while I've had my kids. But for me individually and my career trajectory with my patient load and the size of my own personal acupuncture practice, that has not been able to be a linear growth. And I accept that, even though it's hard, but it makes sense. So a little bit about my journey is that started about 5.5 to 6 years ago when I got pregnant with my son. So October 2020 is roughly when I got pregnant with him, and until I gave birth to him in July of 2021, my pregnancy was actually so amazing first time around. I was able to exercise regularly with him. I was able to have minimal morning sickness for the first part of my pregnancy, at least what was, it was manageable. I was not really worried about ramping up my acupuncture practice at the time because I had been a newer acupuncturist and I knew that I was going to want to start having kids at some point soon. And I had a big rest of the business with massage therapists that I needed to make sure things were in place for that to run smoothly for the side of the business that I had already grown. So that ran smoothly while I was on my maternity leave with the baby that I was going to be planning to try to conceive. So that was kind of where my focus was. And so I wasn't really focused on growing my acupuncture practice before my first child. And during my first pregnancy and my first postpartum time period and maternity leave, I didn't have any other acupuncturists that were working for me. So I made a decision that I wasn't interested in hiring another acupuncturist yet, because it would have required a lot of time and effort and stress to bring that new person on board. And I really, because I knew that I was going to be taking maternity leave, I really hadn't prepared my practice in a way that I would have enough clientele to justify having another acupuncturist get started. And so I just decided to wait on that, and I referred my patients to other providers during that time frame. I had my practice for a little while, and then once I had my baby in July, I took a few weeks off before he was born, and then I took about 8 weeks off after he was born. And when I returned to work, I came back 2 days a week. Well, I shouldn't say that. I had 2 days a week of childcare. My mother-in-law watched my son 2 days a week for the first 11-ish months of his life, and 10 months, actually, I guess it was. And so during that time frame from when I was 2 months postpartum to when he was about 10 months old, I had 2 days a week of childcare. That 2 days a week was for me to treat patients. Some of the time, if I had a hair appointment, if I had a personal appointment I wanted to do, if I wanted to do any kind of self-care, it happened during that time too. So I was regularly treating patients probably about a day and a half a week. And so during that time frame, obviously, I'm not able to be fully treating patients. And then there's times where I'm sick, or he was sick. But so my point being that I didn't grow my practice a whole lot during pregnancy, and then I also was not in full practice growth mode when I was only going to be able to be treating patients realistically 1.5 days a week. And my husband and I had agreed that we weren't going to put our son into more of a traditional daycare setting until he was at least 18 months old. That was our path, no judgment on anybody who puts their kids in daycare sooner than that. That's just what we had agreed we wanted to do. And so that meant I was going to be home during that time with our son, because my husband had a W-2 job. So during those time frames, you need to keep in mind that obviously your practice is not going to be growing in the way that you want it to. And really, why would you want to put the effort into growth when you can only accommodate 1.5 days a week of treating patients, right? If you're only going in and treating patients for a certain period of time, it's not the time to be trying to put in a lot of growth effort. And so, then in, January of 2023, he turned 18 months old, and we put him into a daycare 4 days a week. Now, obviously, if you're a parent and you have already experienced this, you know that typically whenever you have a child who starts daycare, they get sick frequently, and he did. And really what I wasn't prepared for was I wasn't prepared for how much my husband and I were also going to get sick, because I felt like, oh, well, he's a kid and this is his first exposure, and so he hasn't built an immune system yet, so that makes sense that he will get sick. We were not used to kid germs. I was like, we're adults, we have immune systems, but we have immune systems to things that we're exposed to on a regular basis, which is not the same thing as toddler germs. And let me tell you, those things kick adults' butts. So we had to deal with obviously times where I was sick, and so I had to take off work. We had to deal with times where our son was sick and I had to take off work. My husband and I finally got onto a routine, which was so much better for our marriage, of the days that I worked were the days that my husband had light meeting days, or not, no meeting days. That way we kind of made an agreement that if I'm only going to be able to go in 2 days a week and our son is sick, then if our son got sick on days that I was going to have to be treating patients, we couldn't send our sick child over to my mother-in-law's. And so then my husband would agree that he would be the one to take the days off. So if our son got sick on a day that I had patients, I didn't have to cancel 15 patients, my husband would take PTO. And if it was any other day that my son was sick, then, I would be the one at home with him. So that was kind of how we navigated that, to make it a little bit easier, where then I only had to cancel patients for the times that I got sick instead of the days that my son was also sick. So that helped. But, you're going to have times where you're going to have to take time off, and that's just kind of how things go. So between the time frame of when he started daycare, which we put him in 4 days a week, not 5. And so during those 4 days a week that he was in daycare, I had, 9 to 5 roughly, that I was free to do what I wanted to do. Around that time, we actually purchased our commercial building. And so I treated patients 2 of those 4 days a week. And the other 2 days a week, I was at our new building, painting walls, putting together furniture, purchasing art, decor, purchasing furniture, putting together furniture, all of the things to try to get our new space ready. And so for us to move into our bigger space, because we were in an 8-room space and we were moving to a 12-room office that that was a commercial building that we purchased. So lots of renovation that had to happen, lots of meeting with the contractors about picking out flooring, picking out tile for the bathrooms, just a whole bunch of things. So that really took a lot of my time, where now I might have had 4 days a week that I could have treated patients, but I wasn't, because I was trying to get the building ready for us to move into. That was the best use of my time at that point. Then came, after a few months of that, I did have the ability to start adding on more time to treat patients. And so once we were in our office and things had gotten settled and kind of got into the routine of the new space, I did bump up to treating patients for 4 days a week. Now, that lasted until, so let's see, so January 2023 was when he went into daycare. April of 2023 is when we moved into our new building. So probably safely May of 2023 is when I started adding days where I was now treating patients like 4 days a week. And that was great. I was able to do that for a while. But really, I was only able to do that for less than a year before I got pregnant with my daughter. And my pregnancy with my daughter was way harder on my body than my pregnancy with my son. So I had less than a year of working 4 days a week, treating patients before I was pregnant with her. And I had a really hard time in the beginning with morning sickness. So there was time that I had to be off because of that, or I had to have shorter days because of that, or I had to space clients out further because of that. And then that lasted until I was about 16 weeks. And then not that long after, I got some really bad issues with pubic symphysis dysfunction, and I had days that I couldn't even walk. So that created a whole nother problem for me. I had to stop exercising around, I think 28 or 29 weeks pregnant, which was really hard on me, because I enjoyed exercising. Weirdly, I enjoyed exercising during pregnancy, and before that I always was like, ugh, I don't want to go to the gym, but I really enjoyed it during pregnancy. I felt good about trying to keep my body as healthy as possible so that I would have a healthier labor and delivery and pregnancy and all of the things, but I just physically could not exercise anymore, and so I had to take a break from that, and I had to cut my days of work back to 3 half days a week of treating patients. If I did 3 half days a week of treating patients, then I could manage, as long as I was also getting a weekly massage and a weekly prenatal chiropractic appointment. If you're going through pregnancy, I would highly, highly recommend you find a really great prenatal chiropractor in your area, because she literally saved me. I would have had to take maternity leave at like 30 weeks pregnant if I wouldn't have gone and seen her once a week. So highly, highly recommend you find somebody in your area that can help if you need that, right? Because some of the time there are resources like prenatal chiropractic that literally allowed me to continue working. So instead of taking leave at 30 weeks, I ended up working until I think it was 38 weeks with her, even though it was like 2 to 3 half days a week, but better than nothing. So during that time frame, obviously, I'm not trying to grow my acupuncture practice. I'm just trying to survive the days that I do have. And I did hire another acupuncturist during my second maternity leave. So the other provider started working for us, I believe, in May of that year. So she was there. She started in May, and then I had my daughter in early November. So she was there for a while. She wanted to do part-time, which is perfect. That's about the hours that I had for her. And then she was also there to treat patients while I was on maternity leave, which was hugely helpful. And then after I had my baby, second baby in November of 2024, I took 10 weeks off. And then after those 10 weeks, I ended up really only having, for the first 6 months of her life, I only worked treating patients 4 to 5 hours 1 day a week. And that was just for me to go in, treat my follow-up patients, and go home, because I didn't have a lot of childcare available. And then after my daughter was 6 months old, I had 1 to 2 days a week with my mother-in-law watching her for the next probably 4 or 5 months. And then after that, we ended up having to find a nanny who did a couple of days a week. So really, between the different people that were watching her from the time she was 6 months old until 18 months, I had a same thing, about 1.5 days a week in the office treating patients. And then she just started daycare about a month ago. And it's funny, like narrow-minded thinking, I kept thinking, okay, when she turns 18 months and she goes to daycare 4 days a week, I'm going to get like my 4 full days a week back, just like I had after my son started daycare at 18 months old. Except that now my son is at an age where he graduated TK and they're out for the summer between TK and kindergarten. So she started daycare, and then literally 2 weeks later, my son was out for the summer. So he's now doing some camps here and there. But it's life, right? That these are the phases of life that we're in. So I want to encourage you that, that was basically my story for the last 5.5 years, and having 2 kids. If you're having a kid and you're taking maternity leave and you're coming back postpartum part-time, and then you're having more kids, you're going to go through phases where you are either not working at all or where you're working way less. And so it is completely normal to not have your practice growth be happening in the way that you want it to. And when you have dreams of what your practice will look like in the future and the kind of acupuncture practice that you want to build, these ups and downs of like working 4 days down to nothing, up to half a day, up to 1.5 days, back down to nothing. It's hard. It's really hard. And so I just want to encourage you that if you are somebody who wants to have kids and you want to have some time at home with them, and you don't immediately want to put them into a full-time daycare, and you do want to spend some time at home while they're young, where you're working part-time and you're home part-time, that is wonderful and it's amazing, and you should do that. But you should also just keep in mind that you don't have the same hours in the day. You don't have the same number of hours that you're treating patients. You don't get to do your, full-time work and then still have full-time at home. There's just not that many days in the week, right? So if that's where you're at or where you are headed, and you want to be able to enjoy that time and you want to be able to be home part-time, then you just have to be realistic that your business and your practice, I shouldn't say business, because if you have a business overall, our business overall grew, but my personal practice, your personal practice is not going to be able to grow at the same rate when you are in a season of going through pregnancies, going through maternity leaves, going through postpartum return to work, and then repeating the process, right? So be patient with yourself. Know that it is a hard season, but it also is not a season that's forever. And then the other thing I want to touch on briefly real quick is part of one of the things that I'm very appreciative of is I'm appreciative to my younger self who hustled and built a business so that I did have other employees who were working for me when I did take those maternity leaves. It allowed me to financially be able to still support myself and bring money into our household while also just returning to work part-time. If you are somebody who is either, considering maternity leave, or you're going to have another kid and you're trying to prep for that in advance financially, I would highly recommend you check out the acupuncture practice systems that I've built. It's a membership that includes so much content, depending on which tier you're at, includes so much content on how to hire and train and onboard other employees, what to look for, documents you need like employee manuals, job postings, interview questions, business coaching videos on a wide variety of topics. And this will be something that can help you get things in place so that you can enjoy more of that maternity leave and a slower return postpartum while still being able to have your income be supplemented. So if that is something that is interesting to you, I will leave the link for acupuncture practice systems in the description below. And otherwise, I just wish you the most amazing journey with your practice throughout motherhood.